has any questions or comments about the agenda this evening? If not, then the second agenda item is items for the board members and general manager. Before I do that, I noticed we have some people from public here, so I just want to give you a brief overview of facility safety awareness and meeting logistics. I want to thank you for attending the meeting. We have EWEB management and subject matter experts here in the room and virtually, and tonight's presentation, remote presenters will appear on the screen. You're invited to sign up at the table at the back of the room if you want to provide public testimony. Visitor access is limited to the board meeting room and restrooms. Restrooms are located on the first floor through the exit door across the hallway. In case of an emergency, such as a fire alarm, exit through the glass door at the back of the room unless it's unsafe to do so. Emergency evacuation is needed. Exit from the front of the building if possible, cross the bridge and assemble out in the parking lot. If a greater distance of the building is needed for safety, assemble at the flagpole at the parking lot of the east entrance. Or if absolutely necessary, exit the rear of the building just behind the restrooms, take immediate right, and assemble at the far end of the building. Tonight's meeting will be recorded. The recording will start when the meeting is called to order and will continue until adjournment. The meeting will be muted during the break. Aside from that period, virtual participants on the screen will be able to hear conversations in the room until the meeting is disconnected. Thank you. So the next agenda item is item for board members and general manager. So I'll start with Commissioner Schleifer.
Only thing I have is that I was able to purchase my very first e-bike and got my rebate already from EWEB, and that was a really smooth and easy process, and I'm super grateful for that $300 towards my bike.
Yeah, John. Nothing. Sonia? Matt?
Nothing for me.
Frank?
Thank you.
I got a couple things. I purchased an electric car and I'm having a lot of fun. I'm going to get in trouble with it. They're way too fast, but it's a lot of fun. I do have a question from Frank. I know I had a little issue with International Paper and the use of the riverbanks above our water intake, and you had a meeting with them. If you could report back to me on what the results of that meeting are and whether or not they're going to clean up that mess and whether or not we may be able to acquire that real estate, I'd really appreciate that. Thank you very much. And then this Saturday, I'm going to be at a dedication for another one of our emergency water systems at Sheldon. We're going to dedicate that, I think, Saturday at 11, and another emergency water station going. So good for your staff. So thank you very much. The next thing is a public input.
I just got something.
Go ahead.
Mackenzie Watershed Council is having a potluck this Thursday. It's at their new offices just right near Day Island Park. So if any commissioners wanted to go, they would be more than welcome. They do great work.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next agenda item is public input. So I'm going to open public input, and I'm going to say, when your name is called, please come to the podium. Clearly state your name and obviously your address or ward. Each speaker will be offered 3 minutes to present their testimony. Please keep track of time by watching the timer at the front of the room or listening to an audio notification when 3 minutes has elapsed. If you are participating by telephone, remember unmute your call, *6. Do we have anybody on the phone? Okay, I'm going to skip that. After all testimony is heard, each commissioner will have an opportunity to speak if they choose, although by policy we do not engage in a back and forth. Please note that a failure of the commissioner to speak shall not be construed as support of or opposition to any speaker's testimony. If the question is presented by the speaker and will not provide an answer, any web staff member will contact the speaker so the question can be addressed at a later time. So the first person signed up to speak is Jerry Astor. Please step to the virtual podium. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Thank you for allowing me to speak once again. It was a privilege to speak to you last month, and I'm here to speak on the same issue, and that is the issue of Lieberg Lake. After I gave my testimony last month, people in the community were greatly interested in what I had to say, and so several people, not I, developed some petitions and started circulating them, and they're still in circulation. I currently tonight have 50 signed petitions for you, full page, of people who hold the same position that I expressed last month, and that was that whatever option you decide to choose for that project, that you consider an option that preserves the lake for the community, for all the reasons I listed in my testimony last month. So I'm not quite sure who to present.
Well, you can give them to our general manager right here. That's the top of the start right there. All right. Now you can, now there, you don't, they'll never get lost, I trust me.
Well, we had copies, so.
Well, thank you very much for
Thank
your
you.
testimony, and we really appreciate it. Is there anybody else in the audience that would like to address the board on any topic that may be relevant? If not, then I will close the public input and have some comments from commissioners. Anybody have any comments on the testimony this evening?
I would just say thanks for testimony and thanks to those who gathered signatures, and we certainly have a really difficult decision to make in front of us for sure.
We realize that.
Yeah, I think we're all wrestling with that, so I appreciate the input and taking the time to come to us.
Other questions or comments? I'd like to thank you, Jerry, for reaching out to us. And Jerry? I'd like to thank you for reaching out to us, but I'd also like to make you aware that we have a lot more public input and public sessions up the river. If we have scheduled more listening sessions and things such as that. And if you check our agendas, this thing is going to, it's really getting after it here shortly. It's on the agenda this evening, but also it's on every agenda we have between now and December. And so it's a big decision, and it's going to require a lot of thought. So thank you very much for your input, and stay engaged. Thank you. Okay, that will do that. Thank you very much. Next agenda item is going to be the consent calendar, approval of consent calendar A. Does anybody have want to move anything out of that? If not, I would entertain a motion to adopt.
Move to adopt.
Good. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Next agenda item is consent approval of consent calendar B. Anybody want to remove or discuss anything? If not, I would entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve.
Moved and seconded by Carlson, seconded by McCray. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Nothing was removed, so item 7, Riverfront Property RFP and next steps. Frank Lawson, General Manager.
President Brown, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. Just a couple of quick updates and a recommendation this evening. So first of all, the RFP closed in mid-August, and we received 4 different proposals. Go ahead with the next slide. Gene Science Center, OB Companies, Olympus, Academia, 3 Muses, and then one of the original intended proposers withdrew from the process. Each of these proposals covered different aspects of their intended interest. Some of them were more visionary, some had different uses of which we were interested in. The RFP process, however, called for a series of evaluations based on a scoring matrix. And each of the proposals lacked a certain degree of specifics around some aspect or another, whether that be pricing or terms and conditions, and really created a situation where a scoring matrix was no longer applicable. Our recommendation based on that, and so and without going through each one of them and the specifics, what we're going to recommend to the board and open for discussion with the board is that we cancel the RFP. It's something where none of the proposals fulfilled the entire vision economically or the combination of economics and terms and conditions. And then therefore, by canceling the RFP, you could direct the general manager to continue to explore and pursue the sale of the riverfront property under guidance that you would provide to me in executive session. And that would more than likely get scheduled in October, with the disposition potentially being also approved by the board or not, depending on the parameters that you provide. So our recommendation this evening, based on the RFP proposals that we received, was that we cancel the RFP. President Brown.
Sonia.
Could you also outline for any of the folks, I see a number of faces in the crowd that I don't recognize, so I'm wondering if some of the people here might be for this particular topic. Could you spell out a little bit, if we did cancel tonight, some of the outreach that you might have with the people who did submit a proposal?
Absolutely, Commissioner Carlson. So first of all, what we would do in a canceled RFP, and this goes for any RFP, we would officially respond to all of those proposers that the RFP is canceled. And also, we would be in a position to talk to them about their particular RFP and their proposal as well. You know, and whatever potential issues or risks that we saw with the proposal.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that they had feedback. So they would know.
Right. They'll get direct feedback, Commissioner Carlson.
Thank you. I think given what we've seen, I'm supportive of the outline that staff has provided and canceling.
John?
Thank you. Well, I'm just sad that Mindy and I don't get to going on more meetings in the scoring committee. I was really looking forward to those extra meetings. So that being said, yeah, I think it's important to point out that this isn't no to any of these proposals. This is just that the proposals that were put forward didn't meet the criteria that we had set out to go through an evaluation process on. It just wouldn't have worked, you know. We couldn't compare this one to this one because they were coming at it from different directions. It wasn't that this one was not applicable and this one was. They just didn't meet the criteria that we were asking for, so it wouldn't be fair to judge them using that criteria. And so any of these people are free to, if we move forward with this, would be free to go into negotiations with the general manager or whoever it is, and we would set some parameters that we're looking for, and hopefully people could meet those parameters and move forward. We talked about, we don't want to be in the real estate business. That's not our mission. Our mission is providing light and water, and that's what we need to put our energy into. So hopefully this will lead us to a conclusion of getting this property disposed of in a responsible manner. But I just didn't want to let anybody know that the door was closed to them just because we are closing the RFP process.
The other thing, Commissioner Borowski, is that in going through the process and looking at the different proposals, I think you're absolutely correct in the sense that when you have sort of a mixed degree of proposals, you can't do a cross comparison. Some proposals outlined a very clear vision, but then the financials were very insecure and unspecified. Others had more specificity around some of the terms, but the financial offer was not clear or the vision wasn't clear. And so each of the different proposals had some ambiguity in some of the key areas that we wanted to hear. And when we didn't get more than two or more that you could actually make a comparison with, and the commissioners, you saw the proposals, so just so people in the public know, you've actually seen all the proposals. This is the reason for the recommendation to continue in a different way.
Other comments by Matt?
Just briefly, just want to say thanks to the commissioners who have already put in extra work to I know. I mean, we all spent some time trying to think about what are the criteria, but I know several of you put in more time than others. So thank you for the effort that you put in, and I think it helps us lead towards some criteria for the next phase. I also want to say thanks to the folks who put together proposals that were very in depth. Yes. Maybe missing some criteria that we had spelled out or another, but clearly a lot of effort went into those and thought and resources. So that is acknowledged and appreciated.
Hey, Mindy?
Yeah, I also agree with the recommendation. I think that we tried to come up with a RFP that would kind of encapsulate everything that we wanted to do, and clearly it didn't work. And so I think the best thing to do is to move forward as quickly as we can, and I think by going ahead with this recommendation, it will allow us to do that.
Yeah, I guess I'm last, so I don't disagree with that recommendation. I just hope that, I think I've been through the RFP process at Civic Stadium and Eugene Civic Alliance, how they amassed that group of people, very short notice, they got the money together and they were able to write the check, and then they were doing additional fundraising to achieve their goal. I don't know if that, that's, this, by doing this, it allows us more flexibility with, and or any proposer, the flexibility, because we still have a for sale sign on it, but now they can just go to the general manager or his designees and negotiate. And then we have the sideboard set and say, this is a minimum price, well, these are some of our preferred uses and users, these are some of our criteria, and we can go from there, because you're absolutely right. Some of us have some more time in it, but we have some things on the agenda coming up that are huge, and we have to stay focused on running the electricity and water systems here. And so I think to allow staff to do this more than us, it will be okay. So I'm going to be supportive of the recommendation as well. So that said, it's a action item. There's a proposal here. So would anybody like to recommend make a motion to adopt the recommendation?
Adopt the recommendation?
Moved by Carlson, second? Second by Schlossberg. Discussion, John.
So if we move forward with this, Frank, what type of direction does this give you, and what other areas for check-in are we going to have in your mind?
So the first check-in will be to establish the boundary criteria with the board. That would be an executive session in October. That would be the very next step. At that, and as part of the October meeting, we would bring forth a resolution that would specify the parameters and process, just in general, for the public to be aware of, such as, does the general manager have permission to not just negotiate, but also execute any kind of sale if within the parameters or not. Those are things that we will be working on between now and then.
And that's the question that I want to know is where the board feels on giving you that much authority. And I want to have a robust discussion about that.
I think so in the past, and some of this would depend on how specific the criteria is developed. And I'll say how tight that criteria is. EWEB in the past has generally given the general manager the authority to both negotiate and execute. However, given the particular public visibility of the site, the board may wish to draw the line and say you can negotiate within these parameters, but ultimately the board has the final say, and that would certainly be acceptable in this kind of case at all. And so you have a few weeks to think about how you position that from an individual perspective. But either of those, I think, in this case would be appropriate. I'm not sure whether to thank you, or you should offer me my condolences to go through this process, but I do think that it opens up some opportunities for people, and we will try to move forward in the best way for the utility.
Any other comments before we take a roll call on the vote? I just have one other quick comment, if I may. So when we're setting the sideboards, I know we had one proposal for a partial acquisition, and I think we will address whether or not we're going to consider that, given where we go with that. So, all right. Any other comments under the motion? Call the question. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Carries unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, the next general business item, agenda item 8, 2022 legislative and regional policy update and legislative information. Jason, someplace.
Okay, I'm here. Give me a second to catch up. You're moving very quick tonight. That's great.
Hey, Jason, have you met President Brown?
All right. Okay, can you all see me and hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good evening, commissioners. Great to see you all. I hope you had a great summer. It's an opportune time to update you all on policy matters in both Washington, D.C. as well as Salem. There's been some significant news out of Washington, D.C. on federal policy that will address climate change and reduce our nation's greenhouse gas emissions. And also, this is kind of perfect timing. A few months ahead of the 2023 legislative session preview to give you at least a hazy snapshot of what that session might look like and what issues could very well be on the final adopted EWEB agenda for the next state legislative session. So we're hitting a good sweet spot here. Next slide, please. First off, I wanted to talk a little bit about Washington, D.C. It's been almost a year since the federal infrastructure bill was passed. You'll probably recall at a previous meeting, I noted the difference between a stimulus bill and a true infrastructure package. The first one really is a sprint, a search for shovel-ready projects to stimulate the economy and create jobs as quickly as possible. In contrast to that, a true infrastructure package is more of an intermediate race, and as such is a multi-year spending effort and strives to identify shovel-worthy projects, not merely shovel-ready projects. So to that end, I would say there is progress. There have not been a ton of actual funding opportunity announcements that have gone out yet. In some cases there have been. Those were probably where there was an existing program, existing federal staff to run it, and it was plug and play. There are many elements of a sweeping infrastructure bill that actually created completely new programs, whole cloth, that necessitated all sorts of HR staffing and rulemaking and a process to stand programs up. So not surprisingly, those programs are still in progress, although you certainly can see 2023 shaping up to be potentially a busy year for our EWEB grant writer and other EWEB staff. We've been participating in all sorts of webinars and trainings on what to expect for funding opportunity announcements. Some of those have been through our professional trade associations. Others of those have actually been conducted by state and federal agencies. EWEB has formally responded to at least 2 federal or state agency requests for information. This is simply a process where the agency solicits input from potential applicants about what will work best for them. So these funds are put to great use and are not overly difficult to access. 2 RFIs we've responded to were on hydroelectric incentives. That's not just hydroelectric production. There are some potential funding opportunities that could also address and check boxes related to our FERC license mandated activities at Carmen, things like recreation, ecosystem improvements. So we responded to that RFI and are watching that closely. Also, we responded to an RFI from the state of Washington relating to their potential proposal to or application to be designated a national hydrogen hub, which comes with all sorts of federal funding. To that end, EWEB actually had an informational meeting with the staff that are leading the effort to prepare the Northwest Hydrogen Hub regional application. It started off as a Washington-oriented effort, but it's been expanded to Oregon and Idaho. And I think the folks at Washington State, it's not an official Washington State, run thing, but a lot of the staff preparing the application are based out of Washington State. They were really thrilled to meet us. So we had a really, really productive discussion with them. We're on their radar and vice versa. There's kind of an effort to do matchmaking in a hub proposal. You want some kind of synchronization between potential production and demand. So it was great that we're on their radar, and obviously geographical diversity will be a strength in a competitive application process. So I think being, to my knowledge, we're probably the most southern located person or entity to respond to the RFI. So I'm glad we're doing that. Moving on, the Oregon Department of Energy has applied or is in the process of applying to US DOE for a formula application grant for grid resiliency. Formula basically means the original bill actually allocated so much money for every state by a formula. They don't just write you a check though. The state has to go through a process to apply for it, basically to do their due diligence to show that the money will be spent in accordance with the goals and the criteria set forth in the IIGA. But I wouldn't call it a rubber stamp, but if you get the work done, any state is going to get the money that was allocated to them in the formula. Odo had a public hearing on August 31st that was preceded by some listening sessions. Our general manager, Frank Lawson, Rod Price, Janine Parisi, and myself were all very involved in all of those meetings, and I think we gave some pretty good input to US DOE that will strengthen their application, which is due by the end of September, which means it's possible there could be funding opportunity announcements within the state of Oregon to subgrantees in Oregon as maybe Q4. I think it's probably more likely 2023. That would probably sync up with also the national program. So I talked about the formula money that every state is guaranteed to get. There's also a nationally competitive program, and anyone in the country can go for that money. There is a carve out in the national program. So much of the money has to be allocated to utilities with retail sales of less than 4 million megawatt hours per year. And EWEB just sneaks barely under that threshold. So that's good. There was a worry that large utilities with regionally significant projects might get most of that money at the national level. We have a shot to compete well in that small utility category. Next slide, please. Okay, more stuff in Washington, D.C. It's really great to report that things are happening at the national level. The Inflation Reduction Act was passed a few weeks ago, and it was surprising. The bill had languished for a very long time. I think a lot of people were ready to give up and move on. Miraculously, they found the votes to pass the bill, and it is a really, really big accomplishment. And I think any American that cares about climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions should be very, very excited about the passage of this bill. The bill addresses multiple parts of the American economy, but there's no doubt the climate provisions are the centerpiece of this legislation. And it's been estimated that the climate provisions will reduce U.S. greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030. And that is an amazing number. I think a lot of people worried to get the votes, this bill would be watered down. And yes, compared to the original climate bill, it is, but 40% is a very significant number. It gives the United States credibility again on the international stage. When they arrive at, global climate meetings, the U.S. is doing something. We're back in the game. So very exciting. A couple of key elements here you'll see in the bullet points. It is a investment-oriented vehicle. At EWEB, we loved carbon pricing. We still do. We still think it's the least cost approach. But at the national level, they had to get the votes. And the proponents of addressing climate pivoted away from carbon pricing or other market approaches more to a standards and investment approach. They didn't have the votes for the standards. You need 60 votes to break a filibuster. However, in the federal budget, you just need 51 votes in the U.S. Senate to pass a budget. And so essentially using budget reconciliation, they passed a massive spending package. And you can see here a 10-year authorization of production tax credits. That's a long period. In the past, Congress has reauthorized these sometimes on a cycle as short as a year or two, which gave no certainty to developers. So 10 years is a very extensive period. There's a direct pay option for the first time for tax exempt entities like EWEB. We don't have a tax liability, so tax credits were, I won't say completely difficult. We went to some very elaborate lengths to create third-party entities with other publicly owned utilities, but this is so much better. It's almost like a grant, like a real true grant option. There's also transferability for entities that may have a tax liability, but it's not very large and they can't use the full balance of the tax credit. They'll be able to transfer that tax credit to another party in offline transactions. And hydrogen's been added. Hydrogen, we know the value proposition there is very exciting. So it's great to see hydrogen take its place alongside the other methods of producing energy in receiving tax credits. It's not just investment on the production side to address both residential energy production as well as addressing demand, energy demand, and reducing people's bills and helping out their bottom line. There's all sorts of consumer-facing incentives, $9 billion for home energy rebate programs, 10 years of tax credits for heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, and rooftop solar, $4,000 in tax credits for used electric vehicles, up to $7,500 for new. As you know, some of the EV tax credits had actually ended for certain automakers because they'd hit the cap that had been created. So this is just extending everything and increasing it. It's great. I also wanted to mention in many of these tax credits, they've also converted them into, I guess, what you would call cash on the hood or point of sale. The government's basically fronting the money as opposed to people having to, pay up front and then, be compensated on the back end when they file their taxes. So that's also very, very pro-consumer to convert these to these point of sale type. Even it's tax rebate, but you get it up front. It's tax credit rather. So that's great. And finally, $1 billion to make affordable housing more energy efficient. I can't think of a better way to invest money in affordable housing that's comfortable, energy efficient. So it's a big deal. Lots more to come on this. This just happened, and I mentioned the IIGA and all the work that's being done, two-way communication between potential future applicants. Beneficiaries with the agencies. They're going to have to start doing that for this bill as well. So I probably can tell you a lot more about this bill in a few weeks or months, but it's something to definitely be excited about. It's a major investment in addressing climate in this country. Next slide, please. Pivoting to our state capital. As it's several months away, it's always hard to know exactly what we're going to be doing. I think the first one is the easiest one because it's an absolute imperative. It's something EWEB will be playing offense on. We will be working with other stakeholders, other utilities that own hydroelectric facilities, but EWEB's leading the charge on this. We're playing some offense. There was a court case in December of last year, WaterWatch versus Warm Springs Hydro, that effectively created a major problem for EWEB. Anytime a hydroelectric project has not been generating for a long time, you begin a clock basically on potential forfeiture of your water rights that were issued for hydroelectric generation. The workaround on this has been you could put the water to beneficial use and toll the statute by leasing it to a third party, say an irrigator. The Supreme Court decision said that's actually not enough. You have to use the water for the purpose for which it was intended, which essentially puts a 5-year shot clock on any hydroelectric facility that's not generating. So the implications for Leesburg are very big. I think our 5-year clock runs through the end of 2023. we need a legislative fix on this. That there is a potential administrative remedy and workaround. However, it's totally untested. We're not even sure that that might not be litigated by the same plaintiff that litigated the Warm Springs case. So we need the legislature to clear this up. Right at this point in time, it seems like the clearest way to do this would be to create a exemption from the water rights forfeiture statute for any hydroelectric project that has an active FERC license. FERC license comes with all sorts of oversight for issues like safety, and it is a very regular periodic process. If you have a dam that has a safety issue, there's a lot of reporting, at least on a quarterly, maybe even a monthly basis to FERC. So it'd be very solid ground for us to ask the legislature to exempt a project with an active FERC license. And I think it would still be compatible with the spirit of the Supreme Court decision, in which the plaintiff was basically asking for zombie projects that have not generated in a long time, where someone might be holding the water rights for a speculative purpose. Really different than the Lieberg situation. I think we can get this done and still uphold the spirit of the legal decision and what the plaintiffs were trying to accomplish. Moving on, I won't explain a lot about the second one. I think it's a repeat from our last legislative agenda. We're going to be back again talking to the legislature about an investment of state matching funds towards EWEB water infrastructure, including second source. We did get a small amount of money last year from the legislature. Thank you, Senator Manning, for carrying that water for us. No pun intended, obviously. And we'll be back again. There are some funding sources that have a shelf life on them, including ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan, the stimulus bill that was passed during the height of COVID and the economic crisis in America. One of the eligible uses of ARPA funds is water infrastructure. So if the legislature finds itself with unspent ARPA funds, and that's definitely a possibility, we would be sitting there close to the time they have to spend or lose that money. So that's a funding source in addition to general fund or lottery fund that we can apply for. And lastly, this third one is really just a placeholder. There was a task force directed by the legislature to examine how to make buildings in Oregon more resilient, energy efficient, have a lower carbon footprint, be more resistant to wildfire smoke. That committee's been meeting for several months. I wouldn't even hazard to try to summarize the topics they've been tackling. It has been an exhaustive list of measures they are considering recommending to the legislature, and they're gonna have to narrow that down. So I expect to hear a report back, though, as that committee begins to bring its work into focus and make recommendations. We will update you on the work of that group and what could come out of that. So I'll wrap it up there, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Jason. Technically, we got 1 minute and 39 seconds left, but since we're ahead of schedule, I'll take executive privilege and open it. Matt.
Yeah, a couple questions. Jason, well, first, thanks for holding down everything in Salem and monitoring DC on our behalf and reporting back. Quick question about that last bullet item, the Resilient Efficient Buildings Task Force. Are the recommendations there geared towards building code, or are they geared towards legislative incentives?
Highly geared towards building code, but there are incentives that have been discussed.
And are you involved in that task force in any way?
We were not appointed to the task force. I had been monitoring the meetings, though. And Eugene is pretty well served with Eugene Mayor Lucy Venice is I believe the co-chair of the task force, along with Representative Pam Marsh from Ashland.
Great, thanks.
Questions or comments? John B.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Sonia, for bumping this up to earlier on in the agenda. I think that's very appropriate, especially on the state level ones. Jason, I was wondering if at some point you could send out a memo with some talking points, especially on the hydroelectric and the second source, so that if we as commissioners have meetings with state legislatures, we can advocate them and from a place of knowledge, not just saying, oh, can you give me money for the hydroelectric or I mean for the second source, or can you help move this bill along? If you could send us some talking points, because I know that I'll be meeting with some state legislatures over the next few months, and it would be nice to be able to have an educated conversation with them.
That sounds fantastic. On the hydroelectric water rights, we actually are very close to finalizing talking points. I think we're just letting the attorney that represented the defendant in the Warm Springs case was going to take a look at it, as he's as knowledgeable as anyone about the legislative remedy that's necessary. Also on the second source, I think it would be fantastic for us to have what I call a leave behind, something either electronic or paper document you leave behind with someone you've just advocated to, and I'd like to have some good graphics in it for once. I tend to be a written word guy, and I'll need some help from the visual team at EWEB to spruce it up, but I would love to have that for you as a leave behind.
I think our leave behind should be a straw. A message written on it. Is that possible?
Other questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Jason. Yes, I did ask for this to be a little bit earlier, just in case there's things that we wanted to get ahead of. So I really appreciate you jumping in here sooner than you would had otherwise. Great information, and I echo what John Borofsky was saying. I'm definitely meeting with different legislators in the next few months and weeks. We want to have more information. Thank you.
We'll count on it.
Mindy, any comments? Okay, I have a question, Jason. I know that the money that the IRA Act is designed about, a lot of carbon, reducing a lot of carbon. I would hope that we could look to get some help on LIBOR, because, we're struggling trying to get a carbon-free permitted resource back running, and it's a huge financial lift for us. And if there's any way we could get that on the list of projects, I couldn't think of a better project I could promote than helping, get that gap back to where we could, at least make it a little bit more financially feasible to the ratepayers to re-energize that system if it's at all possible, because right now it's a long stretch for us to get there. Is there any opportunity, you think, for us to get money to make that facility safe?
Well, I mentioned the RFI that we responded to on hydroelectric incentives in the IIGA Act. Those are probably a little better fit for measures at Carmen, but we're going to be watching that closely. That was an RFI. They still got to write the rules. I think we may have hinted at that in our comments in the RFI, but we'll be watching that rulemaking very, very closely, because potentially, again, I think it's probably a better fit for Carmen, but potentially that could be an area where we could seek some assistance in those funding opportunities.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions for Frank?
Yeah, President Brown, one of the things I was going to mention around the timing of this is that we do have a follow-up correspondence scheduled for November, so that when the board reviews the legislative agenda for 2023 in December, which is when that usually is, you'll have some current updates from Jason. So this is going to be an ongoing September, November, December kind of sequence, thanks to the feedback from the board.
Thank you. No other questions or comments? Jason, thank you very much. Good to see you. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Hydrogen plant. Appreciate it. Thank you. The next agenda item is number 9, the goal number 4, the RFP for EWEB Enterprise Solutions ESS Information System Provider.
Hi, good evening. I get to present in person this time. So I'm going to try to move my own slides here and talk at the same time. So, but if I get off, just throw something at me and I'll hit the arrow because I'll probably keep talking. So the last time I presented on the ES program was several months ago, so I thought I would just start with a quick recap of where we were and how we've gotten to where we are right now. So back in early 2021, I did say that here, right? We talked about a lot about IT, but really talked about our legacy applications and how we were struggling to do things because of the legacy applications that we had with an average of 20 years old with those systems. And so brought forth a recommendation to modernize those with an ERP, which is that integrated suite of business tools. With the board's approval, we moved forward to an assessment, had a third-party company come in by the name of SurePower, came in and did an assessment, spoke with our managers, supervisors, executive team, subject matter experts to really get an understanding of where we were and where our ideas moving forward were. And then also not wanting to forget a question because throughout this, there's a theme of this, back to your question, Commissioner Carlson, what's different this time? And we talked about top-down sponsorship and some of the things that we're doing differently this time. And then we've anchored this all on our guiding principles as we select the product, a very utility-specific, commercial off-the-shelf, enterprise class and supportable. So over the last nine months, not years, we've transitioned. This has turned into the EES program, with the software selection being really a track of that overall program, and EES standing for EWEB Enterprise Solutions. And today we'll talk about where we are with the governance plan, org readiness. We'll talk about our software selection, and then really what's next. So from a program governance perspective, we've got an executive steering committee that we set up that consists of the entire ET. And so really, on the previous slide, we saw top-down sponsorship, but really what this is top-down, I lost my word. What's another word for not sponsor? Help me out, Frank. Commitment, that's the word I'm looking for. Top-down commitment from the executive team. We've also developed a program team, and we've hired a consultant from SurePower to be our program manager who's gone through these transformation efforts before to help guide us. We've also hired another consultant from SurePower for business readiness and change management to help guide the change, because that's a big piece of this transformation. We've also got the framework for our workstream teams who will partner with our solutions implementer to do the work, right, to actually transition from old software, legacy software, into the new system. And then we've also built a framework around operations team, and that's to really help ensure the integrity of this system long term. And so, Commissioner McCrae, you asked last meeting, how long before we have to do this forklift project again? And really the answer to that is we don't ever want to do it again. We want to maintain the system and keep it up to date so we don't have to do that ever again. So legacy being a bad word in the software world. So as we look at our organizational readiness, we'll kind of go around this counterclockwise. Lots of communication. We've got an updated SharePoint site, sending out weekly news articles, change leader training and change agents. It's really that conduit so the program team can be feeding information to leaders and then change agents, which are EWEB employees that are embedded in the divisions, to make sure they're getting accurate information about the program. We did an internal survey to kind of find out where people were and how to address those things. We've done some lessons learned sessions to make sure that we sidestep landmines and hopefully take on the good things that we did last time and do them again. The other portions of Goal 4 was to do business process mapping and data governance, to build that data governance framework, and both of those are really important pieces, and we're well on track and started down those two as well. Now for the fun slide. This was a journey, and it was a really long journey, but it was really it was a good one. And so for our software selection, we released an outcome-based RFP in Q1 of 2022, and at that time the executive team appointed a 17-member scoring team. So from across the utility, the entire all the divisions were represented. And then in Q2 we had responses, and we reviewed those responses. We had on-site vendor demonstrations. And you can see we had an average of 35 staff in each of those sessions. Of them, over 1,800 hours of seat time. People watched on, 80 pages of notes that we got to go through. Q3 was vendor follow-up Q&A, virtual site visits, so we had an opportunity to reach out to other utilities and ask what went well with their implementation? What would they change? Did the vendors really do what they said they could do during the demonstrations, and have an opportunity to just kind of fact check? And then we received the initial pricing bundle. And through all of those three, there was 3 phases there. Through those 3 phases, SAP was issued the intent to award. Which is, I'm sitting up here and I can't do a backflip, and if I could, I'd probably hurt myself. But this is a really exciting time, right? I mean, this was a huge endeavor that the team went through, and it was a really robust process, and so it's a really exciting time. And so now we're in the contract negotiations to finalize those contracts, and hopefully we hope to have that done at the end of September. So what's next? I know this is a puzzling slide, but I'll piece it together for you. The software costs came in from SAP at about $7 million over 6.5 years. And to just put that into a comparison, we're currently paying about $1.2 million a year in our legacy applications, with about a 4 to 5% annual increase to those. So the $7 million was within the range that we were expecting from our budget. We're also going to kick off a solutions implementer RFP next, which that'll be the partner that we use to help us implement this software. And we're doing this in a very intentional order. We wanted to make sure that we had an expert in the vendor that we selected, in our case, SAP, as part of that selection process. And then 2023 to 2028, Herculean effort, right? I don't know how else to say it. It's just going to be a massive effort. Lots of dedication from staff and to make this all happen. This is a huge piece for our strategic plan, and we're in the mid-game, and we talk about all the pieces that have to be in place to do this. This is a major one that we just have to have in place for our mid-game in order to get to do the next thing, right? We talk about earning the right to do the next thing. Well, this is one of those that's really critical. So I'm really excited that the board gets to be involved in this process. And so what do we have to do? The journey starts with one step, right? So what the program team needs is once we get through the contract negotiations, we need to place this first puzzle. So the software costs. My intent tonight and the previous presentations that I've given was to be able to give you all enough information and answer any questions that I can, that you'll feel comfortable signing that contract when it comes in on consent in either October or November. So that is the end of my presentation, and I would hand it back to you, President Brown.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So looking forward to some questions or comments. If not, I've got a couple. I'll start it out if I may. So I've been through buying a lot of software and things, and sometimes we actually in the past had to litigate because we didn't have the outcomes as expected. What assurance do we have that 3 years into this process, if this company becomes insolvent, that the proprietary nature of the software is passed on to us, so we don't have an investment that's gone?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we did this time around was, with our guiding principles, was we wanted to select a product that was enterprise class. And so you look at SAP as a company, they've been around for a long time. And, I suppose they could go out of business in 3 years. I think it's really unlikely. What we are doing this time around is we've purchased a SaaS model, so we're essentially leasing our software from them. So if they went out of business and went kaput in 3 years, and nobody bought them, then
We can upgrade it.
What's that?
We will have the codes upgraded. I mean, is it proprietary, the software, to where if they do somehow transition to another company or something else, and, because I know the maintenance costs are quite expensive too, is there a way that we can be assured that we're not sitting there having to start this process all over again?
I'm not sure how to answer that. So we're not purchasing licenses this time around. We're leasing space from SAP. And this is the world that all software vendors are going to, or most of them, is to the cloud hosted environments. And so I'll definitely take that and come back with
I think we have some history here at EWEB with some software challenges that we've had in the past. So anyhow, all right, Sonia.
No, I'm just saying, I'll remember it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John B.
I'll just dovetail on that a little bit. I'm not so worried about SAP going away. I would be more worried about it being acquired and then not keeping up with the requirements. I had that happen with the point of sale. I mean, very much smaller. Oracle bought the company and said, okay, we're just not gonna continue to service that product anymore. But that, I'm not real worried about that with SAP. One of the questions I had is, you said we're spending about $1.1 million a year on our software now. How much of that will go away and at what time frame? We're spending $7 million over 6.5 years, so a little over $1 million a year. When do you see us being able to not pay that software licensing fee of $1.1 million?
Yeah, so some of that roadmap will be developed with the solutions implementer, but we definitely do see a phase in and a phase out, right? So we won't have to purchase software that we're not going to implement in year one, right? So that full $7 million was if we signed a check tomorrow and bought it for 6.5 years. So there'll be a phase in as the new software comes online and a phase out as the old software goes away. So we'll double pay during the transition throughout the whole, for the entirety of the project.
And then do you anticipate it being similar to $1 million a year to pay them to keep it running, basically?
Yeah, and
licensing fee or whatever it is.
Yeah, and there's definitely things that we'll work out in the contracts as far as escalation goes and all of that type of thing. It also depends on what additional features that are added down the road too.
Sure. Great, thank you.
Other questions or comments? If not, good for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have what you need from us.
I do, yeah. I mean, like I said, what I was hoping for today was, when we bring this in on consent, that you guys, that the board feels comfortable. You've done the work. Oh, I don't know.
Travis will have what he needs from you in a couple of months when you approve the contract.
Yeah. We'll give you the money.
But Travis, one of the things that just a quick takeaway for me is the board is asking questions about how are we going to mitigate the risk of obsolescence. And I think that's a valid point when you're talking about, a different way of licensing the software package at this point. How do we mitigate that? How do we make sure that we own certain data? I mean, I know that's all in what you're working on, but I think that's going to be maybe something that when we get to the contract portion of this would be good follow-up for the board.
And to that point, we're talking about sinking funds on some of our capital projects. Do we need to budget a sinking fund for our IT projects? Keep that in mind, say, okay, we know that this technology turns over every 5 years. Rather than having to bite the bullet every 5 years, do we build that into our budget as a sinking fund for, it's not capital, but it's really similar to capital.
Yeah, we've definitely built that into our long-term financial plans, and it actually is capital now. They've changed the accounting practices. I don't want to speak for Deborah Hart, or her team, but they have changed the GASB accounting standards to where SaaS applications are capital, and so this is a capital investment.
And so that makes it depreciable as well.
Right, it's obviously a different useful life than you would have with a decades-old transformer. But Travis initially mentioned that sort of legacy is something that we're trying to avoid. We are, trying to avoid sort of the big bang approach to this and actually look at these as modules that continue to upgrade over time so that we are not in this position, 10, 20 years from now, when you look across your systems and you go, wow, everything is obsolete here. We want to be able to do this in a way that, to Travis's point, we're feeding this as it goes, so you never reach the point of having a legacy system. You're continually working on your systems, and that's why we would budget it much differently than we have in the past.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So before we move on, I know we're way ahead of schedule. I would like you to indulge me to acknowledge a couple of people in the audience that have shown up. I'm pretty sure I know why they're here and what the schedule is for, but we ran, if you may, I'm going to just take executive privilege to do this. I want to let you know that we ran through the RFP process. We were way ahead of schedule. ran through that again. And to kind of summarize it, what we did is cancel the RFP. We gave the general manager direction. We're going to give him sideboards on the parameters to negotiate with people, and basically just let them try and sell it subject to our parameters. And so I'm just trying to respect your time, and I think I know why you're here. It's not because you love watching these meetings. It's about one topic, and that's a headquarters. And so that said, we are scheduled to take a break here shortly if they want to, or we can move ahead. But either way, if you have questions, we have staff here that can maybe elaborate more on what we've done. But bottom line is, we canceled the RFP. We kicked it back to the general manager. He's going to come back to us about some questions, and he's going to be able to negotiate with anybody or anything about this building. Does that answer any questions you may have had? Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for coming in. You're welcome to stay. I'm not asking you to leave. You're welcome to stay. But I just wanted to be respectful of why I thought you were here. Okay, thank you. So that aside, we are scheduled for a break. The break's scheduled for 7:40. We're about close to an hour ahead. We've got 2 more agenda items, 30 minutes each. We can take one of them, we can take both of them, or we can take a break. It's up to you.
Just cruise, but
Say it again?
that's me. I'd like to just keep cruising.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Can live with it.
Go on, fine. Keep going? Yeah. Okay. Is staff okay with that?
Certainly.
Okay, we're going to keep going.
Can I,
Frank, the customer satisfaction survey results.
can I drive from up there?
It's not a self-driving car, but you can drive.
It's Tesla.
Can you drive a stick shift?
Oh, actually, will this work from anywhere? Oh, great. Just getting my normal place.
The heated seat?
Yeah, it's all ready for me. It likes me. President Brown, Commissioners, good evening. This is Frank Lawson for the record. I wanted to start off by acknowledging the work of Rachel Chilton in our customer survey. Really tremendous job sorting through, developing, working with Ken and a number of other people on our communications team to develop the survey itself. Try to make it consistent with some of the past surveys, but also not get locked into that because there was some new information we wanted to receive and learn about. So, and then analyze it. So Rachel really did a phenomenal job with that. I'm pretty sure she's online virtually, so if there's something that comes up that requires the next level of analysis, she'd be able to assist with that. I wanted to just briefly run through some of the highlights here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on all the different slides, but wanted to talk a little bit about the methodology, some of the general performance feedback that we got. We asked a lot of questions about competing priorities in different areas of work, some of our strategic initiatives, and then some specific we sought some specific feedback around some customer preferences, and I really just opened it up for dialogue from commissioners at that point. A little bit about just the methodology. It's fair to acknowledge, and something that we do need to acknowledge, this was an online survey, so this used a digital method. So one of the things that you'll notice later on is if you are getting feedback of preference around digital techniques, for example, and this was a digital survey, you need to actually go back and do probably another analysis to see whether your general preferences around the digital formats and digital methods would still be the same. So we'll talk about that in a little bit later. This was done kind of late spring, before the summer. You can just see here, a little over 1,000 people responded to the survey, and there were a total of 44 questions with various trade-offs between the responses there. We did a lot of, where we created the ability to do a lot of segmentation, so we can look at how the responses may vary based on things like age, based on income, based on whether you rent or own your property, whether it's a building, apartment, house. We can sort of mix and match all of those things fuel type, so whether you have an electric fuel source or a gas fuel source, so we can slice and dice this data significantly to see what kind of variances we can get in the response. And so the findings in many cases where you saw a page that had sort of some high-level conclusions, and then you saw this comment called deeper dive, that's what we were looking at. We were saying what's the kind of the story behind some of the data, and does the segmentation matter? From a general performance perspective, we did find that on the whole, people do sort of trust EWEB and have confidence in EWEB. This was, in all fairness, the 2019 results were asked a little bit differently. This was a scored ranking, and in 2019 we actually asked, do you have high, medium, or low kind of confidence in us? So we had to do a little bit of just assumptions around what high, medium, and low was. That'll be consistent going forward. We did find in the deeper dive that there was some variance. I think you mentioned McKenzie Valley residents, 9-7. Their zip code, I can't remember off the top of my head, was lower, was in the area of confidence. They also had some other variances relative to what they prioritize, and so we can talk about that. And so we really, McKenzie Valley residents, renters, and younger customers tended to have a lower confidence, while those 55 and older homeowners had more confidence on average than the other groups. We also gathered just some very open-ended feedback. And as you can see, those that had low confidence were very clear to express what was driving that confidence. Cost and rates do matter with these groups, as well as some things around customer programs. We got of the 1,000 people that we surveyed, we got over 600 comments, so open-ended comments. And those who were in that lowest confidence category, 37% of them mentioned cost and rates as the reason for their lack of confidence in us, our ability to control and manage those. The relative to decision making, we try to understand where people rank our value set: reliable, affordable, environmental, safety, community, some of these types of priorities. So we asked questions around how people would allocate points to these areas. Really, reliability and affordability tended to, on average, be the two areas that people the respondents tended to rank the highest, although you can see that income matters in the area of the relationship between reliability and affordability. And that was a pretty common theme, and it's not unexpected that people with lower income categories would be more sensitive to cost and price, and so that was reflected in their feedback, as well as renters and as well as people under the age of 55. So they tended to prioritize cost and price over the other values that were listed there and how we make decisions. So this was a question about use these general areas in the decisions that we make. In our core services, this is where we ask people to rank different types of activities. So in this one, and with all of these, whether it be core services, environmental, community work, we included not just the trade-offs between the different priorities, such as enhancing electric reliability versus water quality. We also had controlling costs as kind of a control measure throughout these, just to understand the trade-offs there. And you can see that in the core service area, controlling cost was the highest, followed by just electric reliability, and then enhancing water quality. You can kind of see the categories that fade off there. the controlling cost was the highest priority. Again, McKenzie Valley respondents put a much higher emphasis on enhancing electric reliability, which was nearly sort of double the overall average for that particular category. So this did, when you got into the deeper dives, you could see how people were prioritizing this. From an environmental perspective, again, costs. So this is where we started to see some real tension between the financial and the environmental, or the financial and the services. So we actually saw this in a number of different situations. So this was for, and there's a graphic later that I'll show you that points out that those who tended to emphasize controlling costs first would put other things last, and almost the opposite. Any of the other people who put that last would put that first, would put cost last. So there's this real dichotomy between the financial priority and whatever particular program or feeling or cause that people have. And it was really pretty interesting to see in a number of these different areas. But again, controlling cost, but we also, in this case, some of the, it kind of saw really sort of split between some of the geographic locations. In many cases, 97, 401, 403, 405 placed a real higher value on protecting the watershed, whereas 402, 408, 478 placed a higher emphasis on controlling cost over protecting the watershed. So this one tended to have a geographic feel to it, as well as really looking at about a third prioritizing cost. Cost still matters, and there was another third that placed cost in the lower third. So this is where we really start to see the battle between cost and different values, and I don't think that's surprising to anybody here, and we'll highlight that a little bit more. I think it does really show itself here when we started to look at community. And so you start to look at the choices here. You have cost, you have helping the community address climate change, limited income programs, emergency preparation, and community presence, just overall. And the stat on the left is pretty interesting. 64% of those who placed controlling costs as their top priority placed addressing climate change as the lowest two priorities. And then it's just the opposite. 64% who put climate change as their top priority put controlling costs at the bottom. So we really started to see that the tension between costs and some of the community values that people have. And this is a really good example. This actually graphically shows it. If you look at the left wheel there, that's those who put the environmental impact as the most important things. And this was in the electricity supply criteria right now. What do we actually consider part of our electric supply choices? There was the group that said if you look at that, 31% of that group put the environmental impact as number one. But if you go down to their fourth priority there, the largest one is the blue line, which is controlling cost or overall cost. So, and then right next to it, the 29%, those people put the overall cost as number one, and you go down to their fourth choice is the environmental impact. So this is addressing the electricity supply, and you again see this. Well, we have the sort of the cost camp, and then we have the environmental camp, and they are placing things at the total opposite end of their priority list.
Were there any geographic differences between the environmental? Oh, you saw that with the different zip codes too. Were there age ranges for that as well?
Yeah, we have age ranges, and it was interesting when we started looking at some of the lowest age categories, I think the first one was 18 to 24 years old, somewhere in there. The lower age groups tend to put a really high importance on cost. Even up, it's even above some of the other values that we've talked about. When we excluded everybody else and looked at that, that's what tended to happen. From a emergency water, alternative water, it's pretty nice to see that almost half of our respondents are aware that EWEB has emergency distribution sites. I think that's pretty encouraging, since we haven't, those started a few years ago. Now the other way to look at that is, well, half of them don't, so there's still more work to do there. That's up significantly though from really just sort of barely pre-COVID, and more work to come there. It's also kind of fair to say that there's not a lot of awareness around the second treatment plant. There's some, but when we ask people their tolerance to support that project financially, you can see that anywhere between $5-10 on their bill, there was quite a bit of support for that. So we wanted to get a little bit of a gauge to how much financial support, even without knowing what it is. So there's not a lot of awareness of it, but there seems to be support for the concept. And then some of the the customer interaction preferences. This is one of those areas where, if you look at, there were kind of the two pie charts here. The one on the left represents us sending them and providing information. The one on the right is really customers contacting us to do some kind of business interaction, and so there's a little bit of a difference there. People, at least who were surveyed digitally, do like digital methods, so that's not a surprise. There was a slight bias, especially towards some of the younger categories, which were even more so that way. It does show in person there. In person really is in this sort of, depending on people who want to conduct business, is really small. It's 3% who prefer that, and then receiving information, I think that's about the same, about 3%. Those are some of the things that we have some follow-up actions on to look beyond the digital survey, to go to some other methods and actually qualify this slide a little bit more, since this was potentially biased by the method that we were using. And then this is really kind of to highlight just some of the overall conclusions, and this was one of those where EWEB's role in community priorities. You can see the chart on the left. Those were respondents that put controlling costs as their top priority, and then addressing climate change as their fifth or bottom priority. So and then on the far other side, those who put addressing climate change as their top priority put controlling costs as by far their bottom. So this is where we really start to see the tension between, it's almost like there's a cost camp and then everything else, and then there's this, oh, we like everything else, doesn't matter how much it costs. So you kind of get the two camps, and this is where we really saw a divide and tension between those. And I think that those are things that we wrestle with in this room as well. And then really, I think, overall conclusions, if, people do, in general, have a high regard for EWEB, trust and confidence. I think it's really important to recognize the importance of reliability and affordability. Both of those tend to become important. And then really looking at, so Mackenzie Valley residents, younger, lower income renters, are less satisfied and place a higher degree of importance on controlling costs and rates. So that matters to them. And so those are just some of the high-level thoughts. I appreciate the opportunity to share. I know that if there's things that we want to dig into, we probably can. But pass back to you, President Brown.
Thank you very much. Questions, comments? Mindy?
Yeah, okay, I have a few questions for this. Is our return rate typical or what we expected? 1,000 out of 40,000?
I guess Rachel, are you out there? I was going to answer that, but I'll see if Rachel's.
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Good evening, commissioners. Yeah, it hit the target that we were aiming for to get that confidence level and margin of error.
Great. And is this something that we regularly do every 3 years, or has it institutionalized in that criteria yet?
We have done a customer survey. It wasn't quite like this one. We think this one's a lot better. It was a lot more informative. But for a number of years, it was every other year. I think we probably have data that now goes back at least 10 or 12 years. And so certain things, rank the different programs that EWEB has in importance and then satisfaction. So you saw some of that data. That's been pretty consistent. But the questions that were different this time is asking people, saying, oh, all of these things are important, but if you had to prioritize them, how would you rank the priorities? Those are new, and I think we got a lot of value out of really sort of testing people's priorities.
Was there anything unexpected that you included in this?
I think what was fascinating to me, and I don't know that it's so much unexpected, but maybe enlightening, is that when you look, the averages are too easy to look at. You can do a survey and you can say, oh, here's the average response. Well, when you start to dive into the segmentation and the demographics a little bit further, the enlightening part comes from, oh, how do renters feel about us versus how do homeowners feel about us? Because then you can start to normalize that across. So we had more homeowners respond to this survey than we did renters. But we also know that half of the housing stock in Eugene is renters. So we need to actually pay attention to that particular segmentation in order to craft what we want to do. So the enlightening part for me was to seeing the difference between how younger respondents versus older, renters versus owners, higher versus lower income. Mackenzie Valley, for example, their really emphasis on the reliability piece, even above cost, although, and the satisfaction and the trust being lower there, even though, we have a meeting out there and we try very hard to work with that. So for me, the enlightening part was that I think the part that I kind of said, wow, this is probably more than I would have expected, was the real dichotomy in that tension between cost and program and how really extreme that division was. I don't know if I'm surprised when I look around at society that we're more divisive, and in general, satisfactions were kind of down a little bit. I think you kind of look around at the world, it sort of feels that way, but you have this cost and an economic camp, and then you have this sort of programs and services and values camp, and those are very much diametrically opposed. So that was enlightening.
And then one last question is, now what do we do?
So I think we're sort of digesting it at the moment. We also asked some questions about headquarters and other things and strategy. I think this is very useful in some of the strategic areas where we ask about customer awareness around, do you know the differences that electricity has different carbon values and different prices at different times, and to be able to start to formulate what the knowledge base is for potential new programs and services, looking at budgets, understanding the sensitivity around cost and what things we might be able to work with the board that would be investments that the community would be in favor of, or a part of the community would be in favor of, and understanding where not to. So And then, looking in and seeing if there's a difference in response between those that have a heat pump versus an electric, electric heat pump versus a gas furnace, or, do you plan on adding air conditioning? There's some things that really have a lot of value, but we're kind of digesting it now, and depending on the area, I think there's going to be a lot of interesting uses for it.
So a number of years ago, when we were setting our strategic plan, part of the impetus for that and was to boost customer satisfaction in EWEB. When you look at that versus the results you get here, and you kind of mentioned a little bit, but do you attribute that to just the general climate, or do you think that there are things that we're still not hitting on?
Yeah, so the ranking of confidence in EWEB still went up a little bit, sort of on average. Now, that's where we changed the methodology a little bit, so it's probably not fair to say what that specific increase would be, but it seems like the confidence that customers have in EWEB is still pretty strong. One of the questions, I think, was if you could recommend something for EWEB to change, what it would be, and somewhere between 35 and 40% said nothing. It wouldn't change anything. I mean, that was actually the highest response, which is pretty good for a utility to get that kind of response. The individual, when you looked at sort of all the individual satisfaction versus importance, those were all just skewed down just a little bit. It was almost, yeah, that's why we kind of got this just general feel that feels like it's not so specific to us, but it just feels like kind of a more global feeling. But satisfaction or the trust and confidence in EWEB is still high, and higher than it was a number of years ago.
Other questions or comments?
I just want to say thanks for the effort that went into this, having something that we can rely on to look back at. There's so much information in there, and it's so dense, but also really, really nicely relayed in this this packet that we got. There's a lot to glean, and I know I'm going to keep going back to it. These kinds of surveys are incredibly valuable, especially when we start to bump up against really hard decisions. Going back to what other people are asking for. It's really helpful to have this. So I certainly hope we'll continue to do them on some kind of frequency every 3 years. Seems like right, something reasonable. But, thanks for the work, staff.
Yeah. Rachel and her team did a phenomenal job of not just, I'll say, the data piece, but the next tier down, the deeper dive and how you present that and the graphics. Yeah. There's also, knowing the segmentation that's there, the demographics, we also, and it can come up potentially in some of our conversations, but what do renters think about that versus that? Yeah. The goal is to do a general customer survey probably every couple of years. We also want to do some more intermediate surveys on things that are a little more strategic along the way. We actually took the opportunity to dive into how customers would prioritize uses of the headquarters building, for example. That wasn't in the report because we wanted to actually use it in the evaluation criteria. The trade-offs between education and the arts and housing, and so we got feedback on that, but that was something specific. But we want to do some other ones also. But I think probably at least every couple of years would be good to do this one.
Just one question for Rachel, or maybe for you. With 1,000-something respondents, I can't imagine there's enough resolution to be able to look at like specific wards. Question mark. Is there enough resolution that we could look at like the sentiment among the people that we're working to represent, and whether that's different than customers as a whole?
We did actually ask a hidden question, which is how do you feel about your commissioner? But we didn't publish that one. So no, we didn't. That's Rachel I don't know what kind of, I think zip code was the granularity, but.
Yeah, we have zip code, and you'll notice in the findings report, there is a map that overlays zip code and ward. And so you have to do a little bit of a guesstimate there because we didn't ask respondents about their ward, thinking many might they might not know.
Right. And we don't have their addresses as a part of the survey.
No, they were anonymous.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that kind of touches on one of the things that I was going to look at. You know, in all my time sitting in here, this was the first time that I really started thinking about myself as a Ward 2 and 3 commissioner, as opposed to a utility-wide, and that's where I can hopefully go in and dig deep into this and see what the people who voted to put me in here are looking for from the utility. And so that was one of my questions is, will we have the opportunity to dig in with staff and say, you know, what does 97403, 405 feel about this type of issue? That would be something that I would hope to be able to do on a couple of issues, not on everything. So that's one question is it okay for us to reach out to Rachel or whoever and ask specific questions about?
Yeah, I think it would be a great opportunity to do that if you're so inclined. There's a couple of different tools to do that, but they do require a subscription to those tools. But it may be better just to sit down with Rachel or someone on the staff and just say, here's some of the things I'm interested in, and let's dive into 97401 or.
Yeah, I mean, I think I could, at least my ward, I could get out with a couple of zip codes and just say, and you know.
It's really easy to do in the tool that I'll give Rachel credit for. I can go in and click any number of zip codes and see that all the charts and graphs change around on the fly, which is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's what the other comment I was going to make. This seems like something that you would be geeking out over for hours on hours. So in our one-on-one, I might dig in a little bit more with you on this. And then I guess the other question I would have is, how does the university play into this? You know, where, you know, the university, as far as students that are on campus and some of these large rental apartments, you know, do we have a way to touch in, to feel what that segment of our community feels about the services that we're offering? Because I think that would have a different view. I mean, I know somebody that's living in the dorm and not paying a utility bill is going to have a different feel about, you know, climate change as opposed to price. I don't know. Was there a way to tap into the university population?
Rachel, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so respondents are only account holders, and so it's a different view of, you know, customer versus, I think, what you're talking about, Commissioner Borofsky. And, you know, for me, one of the things that the survey really highlights are maybe some areas of additional exploration. So, you know, some more informal research initiatives that we could kick off, you know, in 2023 that maybe aren't quite as robust as this full customer survey. But
And then lastly, did we reach out to some of our large users and see what their response was? Or did we get any responses from our big industrial, commercial type of accounts and get any kind of input and feedback from them?
Not on this particular survey. This was a residential account holder survey. We have done that at a number of points in the past. The last one was a couple years ago where we actually hired a firm to sit down and interview some of our key accounts. And so we've done that periodically, not quite the same schedule, but we do have some history with that, and we'll probably do that again as well. So it would be, you know, sort of large accounts, commercial accounts, and it's more conversational. It still has questions, but it's, you know, instead of being 1,000 people, it's, you know, 20, 30, 50 people. So it's just a different type of survey, but we we do that kind as well.
And to me, that would be something that would be helpful, because I mean, if we have 1,000 households that are looking at climate change, but we've got one industrial user that uses the same as 1,000 households, I would like to know what their view is on some of these issues, because again, a large lever can be pulled if we know which way the community is leading.
More questions, comments? Frank, you have the questions from us? Good?
I'm great. I hope it was informative.
Okay.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you. I'll pull the board one more time. We got one more agenda item. And does anybody want to break or roll? Roll. Okay. Next agenda item, net metering program and solar policies. Agenda item number 12.
The button from Frank.
No, I'm stick shift.
Oh.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Rod Price, for the record. I'm here with two of EWEB solar program experts, Greg Kelleher and Juan Serpa Yunus. That way. So renewable energy, solar generation, and its related programs are a vast topic. Tonight, per the request from earlier this year from the board, we want to give a little background on EWEB solar programs, specifically related to public building projects, and be available to support any discussions you may want to have on this topic. I would like to start with the note that numbers and calculations used in the backgrounder and in tonight's presentation are mainly for illustration and are based on averages and general data that EWEB has collected. We realize there are a wide degree of variability in costs and specific applications for solar projects. We are mainly trying to illustrate some relative magnitudes and general principles. So I want to start with probably the most common application of solar generation systems in EWEB service area. And I realize this drawing probably made me feel better as an engineer, but I hope you can kind of see that the customer's PV system for the net metered situation is tied directly into their own electrical system. And the net meter then tracks the power being used by the customer or exported to the utility. Maximum size of this application EWEB allows for net metering is 25 kW, which is the minimum set by the state of Oregon. I wanted to review two cases related to kind of illustrate how net metering works. So case one, if a residential customer consumes more than the solar system is generating over the period of a month, the effective generation rate is offset residential rate of 9.5 or 9.48 cents per kilowatt hour, which includes an energy charge and a delivery charge. In the second situation, if the total generation over the billing month is more than the customer's load, the difference between the consumption and the generation will be exported to the utility and credited at the net metering renewable energy rate of 6.93 cents per kilowatt hour. The renewable generation rate is a fixed average rate meant to reflect yearly energy and power marketing costs. A less common application is the direct generation connection. In this case, the entire amount of generation is exported to EWEB and is metered and credited to the customer at the direct generation renewable rate of 7.24 cents per kilowatt hour. The customer's load is metered separately, as you can see, and the direct generation application is available to all customers for systems up to 200 kW. As you can probably guess, for residential solar systems under 25 kW, it makes more sense to select the net metered application as it provides a higher rate of value by offsetting the residential rate of 9.48 cents per kilowatt hour. I will point out too that systems over 200 kW require coordination with Montville Power and therefore typically contract kind of situations don't necessarily apply. I just want to give a little context of how EWEB's system is populated. As of the end of this August, EWEB's just over 1,000 solar systems installed, and this is since 2001. Of those installed,
approximately 800, over 800 are net metered applications and 45 are direct generation applications. And just to give a little context for a dollar figure, and again, this is very hypothetical, but if we credit 100% of the solar generation at a residential rate, worst case, or best case, depends how you look at it, to a theoretical year in consumption number, total revenue would be about $835,000 per year. So customers who wish to install a solar system will consider many factors. The main economic factors are the generation size of the system with its associated initial cost and the rate at which their solar generation will be credited. From the EWEB side of the meter, the renewable generation rates we offer are based on our expected market, power supply, and transmission costs. Our power supply portfolio also provides for a relatively low residential and commercial retail rate. By charter, EWEB provides services on a cost-only basis, which means our renewable generation rates are also relatively low. Our low rates can make it challenging to get a positive economic return on projects that are fixed in size and larger than 25 kW. For instance, if we consider a new building project that is required by state law to spend 1.5% of the construction cost on green energy technology such as solar, the builder is likely to need to obtain a system larger than 25 kW. In this example, we look at a 50 kW system that is connected for direct generation. Again, this is a hypothetical system with simple economic supply, but I think it illustrates some of the challenges public building developers face from the state requirements. So case one shows that even with upfront credits and rebates applied, under the current direct generation rates, the simple payback is estimated at over 40 years. So if we consider case two, where the project does not necessarily receive any credits or rebates, but a hypothetical direct generation rate of 25 cents per kilowatt hour is applied, the simple payback is reduced to about 18 years. Just a historical note, 25 cents per kilowatt hour was, if you go into the Wayback Machine when it first started, that was the incentives that were being offered back in that time. With our current power supply portfolio and financial systems, the case two hypothetical rate that is over 3 times higher than our current renewable generation rate really does not make any sense to our overall customer rate base. In fact, the overall customer rate base would be subsidizing these hypothetical kind of rates for solar projects. So in summary, EWEB renewable generation policies meet state laws and EWEB board policies. Our renewable generation rates match our other rate structures to meet our energy costs. However, as part of our strategic plan, EWEB will be working on programs to determine the value of renewable generation beyond just cost recovery of energy. In addition to EWEB programs like AMI, Travis talked about EES tonight, and you've heard a lot about the IRP project lately. These things are already in progress. Other emerging items of interest are energy storage technologies, and of course, we've got some pending BPA contracts coming up. So in short, over the next several years, we're likely to be very impactful to our renewable policies. And with that, President Chair, I'll open it for questions and discussion.
Thank you very much.
You can name right at these guys.
Got it. Okay, questions, comments? Matt, I know you got some.
I have a couple, yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you for putting this together. I know there are a couple things that are in the mix here, right? One of the pieces is the calculator you put together to help us think about residential costs for solar. And then we're also talking about whatever incentives or policies we have for public buildings in particular, which really was kind of the spark of a conversation maybe a year ago when Bethel School District was looking at a project and they're scratching their heads trying to figure out how to make use of the 1.5% that's required by the state for investments in renewable energy, right? So when the school is building a new school building or any public building is being constructed with taxpayer funds, we have to spend 1.5% for renewables. There is one school district that I'm aware is not actually doing that at this point, because they're like, this just doesn't make any financial sense for us because of, you know, the very dynamics you just described. And so the question was, are there ways that I have anyway, are there ways in which we could adjust the policies just for public projects so that a school district that's having to spend 1.5% on solar or energy efficiency or whatever they're choosing to spend it on pencils out and makes sense, given that the district we have, the EWEB service territory and the school districts overlap so much that they're, you know, more or less the same group of residents. You know, yes, one is being taxed for schools and the other is paying a utility bill, but it's all kind of the same pool of dollars. Are there some things that we could do to try and make those dollars being required by the state make more sense? Like, to me, that's the question that I'm interested in a conversation about. And at the same time, that some of the things in here are, you know, you said, big disclaimer at the front, like there's all kinds of different numbers that we could use for this. This is for illustrative purposes. But there are a handful of things that don't match my understanding in terms of both the average cost per watt. You have at 4.5 cents for a residential project, and some of the references that I'm looking at suggest more like $3. So by just the kind of order of magnitude is wildly different. And I'm not saying what I'm looking at is right and yours is wrong. I'm just saying there are some things in here that I think we want to get a little more refined on before we make policy decisions about them. The other one is just the lifespan of a solar installation, many of them now being warranted for 25 years. I mean, they last even longer, but are warranted for 25 years. So a 20-year lifespan may or may not be the right, you know, the reference point. I would encourage us to just socialize this a little bit, to, you know, take it out to some of the solar installers who are doing these calculations right for homeowners and see, you know, do our numbers jive with theirs, and if not, what might we do to adjust? And then the last thing I would say is that this calculator is, at least the one where we have some details at the end, is about a residential net metering system. And really, I think we're talking about larger scale systems for schools, for example, that wouldn't be 20 panels, it'd be 200 panels. And I think that economics there are different. So I'm hoping we can continue this conversation with a little more socializing in between of the results, just to see, you know, how we can refine it a little bit before we talk about policies as a board. I'm also interested in your thoughts about what policy levers might be turned. The 25 kilowatt limitation is one that it feels a little bit arbitrary, and I think relaxing that might create some more opportunities. But again, curious your thoughts on that. I'm sorry, I threw in some questions, opined a whole bunch. So
one point you touched on, I think pretty well, is there's an enormous amount of variables in this, and there's actually, we've got several tools available, and they do allow for adjustments that you're talking about. And I think kind of, so there's, to get to the question of what levers, there's the upfront cost, right? So how do you apply incentives and rebates to that? And then there's the rate question. And so those are two of the levers. What I would say is we cover our costs at this point, so there would be a very selective with the way we're set up and structured with our metering and all the things that we have to effectively provide more incentives or more economic incentives, I guess you will, with either of those levers. You know, we would need more study. I think that's one thing that's very clear. And we would also have to have some board input on that. So, Frank, did you want to say something?
Yeah.
Wave your hand. So.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say that. So part of this was, you know, I think the board was requesting to have a conversation around public buildings. What becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly is that there are a lot of components that come together when you start to talk about programs and pricing, and how in our case we recapture our cost. There's when we looked, for example, one of the policy levers that's been asked about was, well, what if we moved from 25 kW to 50 kW? Now on a commercial type of system, it makes no difference because what we're paying for a distributed generation rate versus what you're offsetting in an energy charge are basically the same. It's a little different on the residential side where because we are capturing fixed costs in a variable component, which is actually not where we want to be long-term, we get a difference between 9.5 cents and 6.5 cents. So it would make a difference there, but for the wrong reason. We did run some calculations where we looked at, different installation values. The reality of it is it's a super long payback. Our rates are incredibly low. And so if the only mechanism you're offsetting is kilowatt hours with a low rate, and there's no value yet that we've captured with, for example, carbon or peak shaving or any of the other things that I think we really want to look at. I think the policy opportunity is to look beyond kilowatt hours and recognize that at some point in the next few years, capacity is going to have a value, for example. If someone adds capacity and we can help them pay for that value, we would offset that. But right now, the only mechanism we have is kilowatt hours. And it's just, you put $3 instead of 4.5, it changes up from 28 years to 26 years. I mean, there's such a delta there because of the environment that we're working in. The only way around that is to have customers subsidize it. And that's really a board discussion as to whether you want to have and subsidize something, which is, it has its pros and cons, and that's something for the board to debate. But the mechanisms, until we get some of these other components in place, is really limited to kilowatt hour offset.
Yeah, and I guess that was my thinking, is that we collectively are subsidizing the schools one way or another by, sinking money into a project that doesn't really make sense, or, we provide some subsidy on the EWEB side and make that have more overall value to the community as a whole. I think there's an opportunity there. I don't know for sure. I know that we do have a team of staff that work directly with schools when they're building a school to talk about what might work. And I'm curious kind of what comes out of those conversations in terms of opportunities for policy adjustments. Like, to me, maybe that's the most direct way to get at it is next time we have a public building being worked on, can we get those policy changes thrown to us for contemplation real time so that they can design that into their project? I don't know that that's realistic. I'm kind of thinking out loud, which is dangerous, and I try and avoid doing it. But I do wonder, how we can circle this in a way that's not causing us to, make a whole bunch of machinations of studies, but gets right to how to solve some of these problems for the whole.
Sorry. Sonia?
One of the reasons that I was interested in looking at the net metering program again is just that the technology has changed. It doesn't seem like for us, I think the low rate has really kind of part of the issue, which is great. I mean, we have low rates, so that still makes it a really long payback period. I am curious if what Jason Huser was talking about, if some of the subsidies at the federal level are going to change any of that calculation to cut that down from 18 to something that's more in line with the lifespan of the solar panels, down to a reasonable lifespan. Have you looked at any of that, or is that just still too undefined to really see how that impacts our metering and our customers' ability to really get value from it?
To my knowledge, we haven't looked at that specific route. Most of those things money is pointed towards resiliency, infrastructure, but I guess I would have to familiar with the grants and when they're coming down.
I can elaborate too when we're done.
There are currently some tax credits available to businesses, 26 to 32%, something like that. It's declining over this year. The new bill that Jason talked about earlier is going to introduce some more that we don't have all the detail on yet. We haven't explored. The challenge for public buildings is that they cannot necessarily take advantage of the tax credit.
I was just going to say, we did build into the calculator any sort of known tax credits or incentives. And so as those change, we can, include those in the present day calculation. I think there was only one, and that had to do with rate of depreciation of assets or asset credit, that kind of thing. But if there's new laws that come out that have different incentives or tax credits, we'll update the model and see what impact that has on the payback.
To the point about the 1.5% that that public entities have to spend, can that be spent on things like electric charging, like vehicle charging stations, or does it have to be spent on the actual generation of renewable energy?
There was an amendment in HB 2496 2019 that allows additional items to be considered for that 1.5%. And correct me here if I'm missing some of those, but which would be battery storage, energy efficiency, and geothermal was included there. I'm not sure what else. And that's something that I was going to mention earlier to your question, Commissioner McCray, was that one of the options there is for new construction in a public building to improve, go 20% better than energy code. And that's something we certainly have robust incentives for, and we have subject matter experts on staff to assist with energy programs that we've been doing so for 30 years. I haven't been doing it for 30 years, but 20 something. So we have those available. There was a time when Bonneville had some support for PV, and we could have really high incentives 15, 20 years ago. Some people are lobbying Bonneville to bring those back, where we have a reimbursement that is really essentially funded from our wholesale rates that we can use for conservation. There's some lobbying to do that for PV projects as well.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that last comment. This still tells me that our highest and best use of funds to go to reduction of carbon and best use of energy dollars is probably still not here. That's what it says to me, and I would still advocate for moving those dollars towards highest and best use where you get the biggest bang for a buck. Even.
So just to be clear, Matt, your initial question was, or thought, that school districts, for example, have to spend 1.5% of their new construction costs on renewable energy. And how can we make sure that EWEB is the best partner in effectively using that money? Where's the most bang for their buck? And I'm curious, apart from energy efficiency, what we talked about, so solar doesn't seem to be it. So do we know what it is?
I think one of the opportunities is the energy storage piece. And Greg mentioned that part of that money can be spent on energy storage now. So we're talking with LCC, and I'm not sure where Bethel's ended up yet, but we are talking to a couple projects that are very large. I mean, you think of a $40 million elementary school, that's higher math, 600,000, right, that they have to spend. So there's a lot of solar panels. You can't make it pay for itself. I think that's where a lot of the opportunity is in storage, and then as he mentioned, in energy efficiency is also.
I was also going to add that some of the work that we're doing in the IRP is helping us establish values for different degrees of energy efficiency, for example, for solar and for storage. So the IRP will help us with how we want to compensate customers for the value that, I'll say, a solar battery combination would bring, which is way beyond just how many kilowatt hours you're generating, but when and how we could use it and the cost there. So the IRP will look at helping to answer your question, which is where is the biggest bang for the buck relative to sort of green technologies and solar and some of these other questions. That and the rate design work that you're doing, we are doing will help with that as well to make sure that those compensations are appropriate.
And one more question is, how does it currently work? So say a school district is building a new building. Do they come and consult with, the architects come and consult with EWEB? Like how does that process work?
That was the, Commissioner McRae mentioned, we had a meeting with Bethel and their architects and their builders and the school district people, and that's the questions they were asking. Hey, how can we make this work? What's the best thing? And can we make some changes? I think that's the route we're taking. I'm sorry.
Okay, so there's no standard protocol, like 4J just built a new school, they're building another school, there's no like, part of their process initially is we sit down with EWEB and we look at how we can spend that 1.5%.
Yeah, and so, every utility approaches this a little different, so different, like a developer from Portland, I think, was involved in the Bethel one, for instance, and so they had some experience with the utility there, and they brought it to the table here. But I would say that by and large, any big project like that is worked through our normal system. It's not the representatives from the large county.
Every solar project has to go through EWEB and a contract and an application to get the metering right. So we're aware of every project that's coming through. The public projects are eligible for up to $12,500 in incentives, which, for a six-figure project, it doesn't sound like a lot, I know. That's 50 cents a watt up to 25 kW. So at that point, we were aware of the project, and we can assist with making sure that it's installed according to our standards. We can also at that point make customers aware of energy efficiency opportunities. So we usually get involved with the developer, architects and whatnot prior to somewhere in the midst of their design. That process for energy efficiency is used very heavily by university and by 4J and Bethel school districts. So there's quite a bit. I wouldn't say there's a standard blueprint for exactly every project that we do work with.
Thank you.
Other questions, John B?
Yeah, so as somebody who has built a six-figure solar panel on a commercial building, back when incentives were different, 2008, you could do it on a commercial building. There was enough incentives that it was a wash between the incentives from the feds, the states, and the depreciation they allowed. I was able to put $120,000 array on a commercial building and have it pay for itself, not using a single kilowatt of energy to offset that. So incentives flow back and forth depending on what the political climate is, either in Washington or Salem, what they want to incentivize. So I think that there's opportunities there. Getting to Matt's question, if I were sitting here and wanting to change policy for public buildings, one that I would want to know who are the big players in that. Obviously, it's going to be the university, the school districts, LCC, the city, and the county, right? Those are the big ones. And usually not water and electric work, right? And then find out what kind of implications that would have if they decided to go solar. What would our other ratepayers have to subsidize them if we wanted to make the 1.5% pencil out for a school to use solar as their model? I think I would be more interested in having us develop answers to these entities that make the most sense, both for economics and carbon reduction that work, and having that as a toolbox for public entities that are going to be developing projects going forward. Say, you know, yeah, you can do solar, but it's going to cost you this, and I don't know if EWEB is really in the position to help subsidize that. But if you did geothermal, or you did battery, or you did this, or you did that, and give them, kind of have a toolbox for them to look at, I think would be the first level that I would like to go to, rather than having our ratepayers subsidize the public things at this point. That may be something down the road that we could look at as a community-wide, asset building. But right now, I think using our expertise to help guide these people would be the most highest and best use of our resources at this point. So that's just kind of where I'm at.
So if I may jump in, I kind of look at this as an unfunded mandate from the state, because when they adopted this 1.5%, we had BETC, an acronym for Business Energy Tax Credits. I mean, I bought them for 4J. It made economic sense to do this, but then the state took that away, and it makes no more economic sense because they're tax exempt and they're non-tax paying entity, and so they can't appreciate it. So for me, my solution would be to go back on the legislature and say, look, you guys said this is really a good idea, and what will help you get there. It's still not there. It's so far apart. I mean, statistics don't lie. I mean, my question was why you have a payback on something that's, for 30 years or something that's got a 20-year life. You got to actually factor in the cost in this and make it even worse. Because if the payback is 30 years on something that's got a 20-year life, you're going to have to renew that short life component after 20 years. It makes a payback more like 40 years. And so I'd push back on the legislature. We're all going to Salem anyhow to hammer on them and say, give us our business energy tax credits back and make it work. Sonia.
So I worked for the chair of the revenue committee when we were dealing with the and I can say that part of the reason that it was pared back is that funding, I mean, as most funding does, you take that and you give it to businesses and it doesn't have a payback, you're taking it right out of the pool that goes into funding education. And that's why it was, I mean, that's a very large portion of why it was paid back. I also couldn't guarantee that the BETC was actually making any better decisions in terms of getting more investment. It was a lot of groups that were getting it and they would have funded it anyway. Granted, that was also when the feds had bigger incentives, so that was part of that change, but.
I look at the state's economic situation right now. They're talking about a kicker that's off the charts. I mean, they're talking about giving us so much money back in 2024 and 2025 on our tax returns because they're collecting so much more money than they need. And
well, it's more money than their economists forecasted they would bring in, not the, sorry.
Well, I mean, you'll never get enough money that they need, but they've got the money. They just don't have the priority, in my opinion. If they want this to work, they're gonna have to buy it down. It still doesn't work. And I agree with John B. about subsidizing, having all the ratepayers at death by 1,000 cuts. We keep raising rates for small projects. We've got some pretty big projects. We're gonna have to raise rates to take care of the problem with the river.
Yeah, and respectfully, I'm not even suggesting we necessarily need to subsidize anything. My question is, are there some policy adjustments that we can make that make this stuff work without it costing you a bunch or anything? And again, respectfully, the 20-year payback, I think we should ground truth our numbers a little more before we start making assumptions about what doesn't pay off.
I have a bigger question then. So this came to us with 3 head nods. And is this something that we want to go down and put more staff time and resources in, knowing what our workload is and our schedule is right now for the rest of the year? And I think that's a question, Matt, that we got to be fair to staff and everything. So if we say, well, let's go on and do this and change policy and find out how this works. What I heard was that if we change policy, we're going to have ratepayers subsidizing it.
I didn't hear. I mean,
Is that, am I wrong?
I didn't hear any subsidies proposed.
Frank's waving his hand again, so I'll let him talk first.
President Brown, I'd like to actually add a couple things, but I know Commissioner Carlson's in the queue. Looking at the mechanisms, both of you, looking at the mechanisms that customers have today to pay off a solar investment, which is basically offsetting kilowatt hours and whatever incentives that we presently have. And the fact that we're cost-based, and the fact that we're low-priced, and also there's no other mechanism to capture carbon value and things like that, there's nothing we could do right now that I can see from a policy perspective that would avoid a subsidy of this. Now I don't want that to come across that, oh, we're giving up on it. But the mechanisms we have today, it would be subsidized one way or the other. When you have an economic investment that doesn't pay off, somebody is paying for it. Well, some of our customers. I do think, to answer the other piece around staff work, there's a few things that are in the works that support this just already. One of them is the model that I think has a lot of value when people come to us as a service agency and say, I want to understand solar and battery and some of these other investments, and we want to be able to roll in new incentives from the state, understand some of the IRA potential and all these other things. And we also really want to develop, as part of the IRP and the rate case and other things, solar, batteries, storage, they will all have their place in the mix at some point. It's just at this point, the mechanism we have isn't there. So that work will continue as well, getting and understanding the value of solar, not just from kilowatt hours, but when you add a battery to it and you can offset peak, what is that worth to us? That will have value. So that work is part of what Rod mentioned when he said this is one of the puzzle pieces. There's several things over the next year or two that will develop products and services that we just don't have today. That will be in there either way. But I don't know. I think I answered your question. It will require a subsidy when you look at just the basis of the economics today. That just, the numbers just aren't close.
Sonia, you had a comment?
I'll leave it alone.
We had somebody at the,
Yeah, I wasn't sure when to interject something. I had something.
Absolutely.
Thank you. So on your comment about the cost and coming closer to what it may be, so we work with a solar contractor. First, we use NREL PV watts calculator, but then to make it so that we're closer to what it would be in Eugene in the common installations, we work with a solar contractor to narrow that down. The cost is more reflective of what we're seeing for net meter installations in our program, but I just ran the numbers for $4 the cost. We see more like $430, $450, and with 25-year life on the system, and it ends up being like a 38-year payback. So even if we were to change it, the number doesn't quite change dramatically.
Thank you. I think one of the things I hear is concern, we have laws that have put some of our customers in a bind. And I think that's important for staff to work with our customers. And so in the course of our work with LCC and some of these other similar kind of projects, we'll look for those opportunities maybe to your point, to develop tools and to look for those opportunities and levers and things. And so and that'll take place again along with our IRP work and some of these things that we're doing. So it's killing me. We don't have AMI, and it's killing me. But that's another problem, right? So because that would be a great enabler to have some of these conversations to get more data. But anyway, that's the.
Other questions or comments?
Thanks for the effort.
It's not done. The good thing is the point's been made, and I think that they hear us, and it's a good thing, but it's an eye opener about sometimes some unintended consequences of when people think they're doing the right thing, and then they turn around, they force you to spend $1 for 50 cents, especially education dollars, so.
President Brown,
Yeah.
I do think there's a lot of opportunity. I think one of the things that Rod and I talked about the other day was this started as a very simple question about, specifically around solar with public buildings. But this touches so many different pieces of the utility that it has started to get us thinking about how customers who make these investments can recoup those investments. I mean, that's where we really started looking at the value of storage, where the IRP, where AMI, where earlier you heard Travis talk about EES and customer systems and how we price things. All of these are puzzle pieces that have to come together. And there is so much opportunity here, but like everything else we're facing, it's not simple. And I mean, it would be really easy if our electric rates were 35 cents a kilowatt hour, or 42 or 52 like they are in Southern California, instead of all in at 6 or 9. I mean, that's just, I don't want to give us an excuse to raise rates that much, but I do think there is opportunity here, and I don't want us to lose sight of the fact that there is, and it's going to come in lots of different forms. And I think public buildings, unfortunately, right now are put in a really bad position. You have to make this investment of which there's no payback for you. That's kind of unfortunate.
John B.
And just for staff to know, and I know you know this, but as one of the faces of the utility, customers come to us and say, how come I can't afford to put solar on my roof? You know, how come you're only paying 6 cents a kilowatt hour? You know, and you charge me 9. That's the question I get all the time. How come I sell it to you and I say, well, you know, those poles cost money and those wires cost money and those transformers cost money and we have to recoup that. But that is a question that's out there that we get as commissioners. At least I know I do. And so having the answers to that is helpful. You know, being able to articulate to them the reason why. And I think one of a good comeback that I just got from Frank was, well, if you're living in Southern California and paying 5 times the amount for a kilowatt hour, it would be affordable. But luckily for us, the kilowatt hours here are lower, so.
Yeah, again, there's so many rabbit holes to go down, and one of them really is that, and this was highlighted, I think, even in this memo, the difference between commercial and residential is that how we recover our fixed cost versus our variable cost is an issue. We, on the residential side, where he mentioned it's 9.5 cents, some of that 9.5 cents is to recover fixed cost. So no matter if you use nothing, those costs still exist. The poles, pipes, or the poles and transformers and wires, whether you're netting out to 0, they still are there and there still have to be the investment. So recovering the fixed costs is a piece of that. And so some of that weighs into the why we charge 9, or why we charge you 9.5 versus you paying 6, is some of those fixed costs, even if you don't use any net electrons, is included in that 9.5 cents.
Okay, we got what we need. Thank you very much. Next agenda items, correspondence, board agendas.
Thank you, President Brown. There were 3 correspondence items. I won't really touch on all of them. I did want to touch on one that was a follow-up item from earlier in the year, and that was updates to the strategic plan. I believe it was in May that we had a conversation. There was some feedback from the board. There's both a red line markup as well as a clean version of that. We tried to incorporate a few things, so tried to get a little bit of consistency within the specific actions of the both midterm or the mid game, as we're calling the next couple of years, and then the outer years relative to the EWEB Enterprise System or EES. Also incorporated some feedback that came out of the discussion with the board around a specific target item relative to Bonneville and the Bonneville contract, which understanding the impacts and benefits and costs relative to the Bonneville contract in the next couple of years in order to be able to decide which product options and electives we want to negotiate into the long term. So that was, we tried to capture that in both the near term and the outer years. And then there was some work around the values. We did, I think to Commissioner's suggestion as well and support in the conversation, differentiated safety from physical and psychological wellness. We specifically picked the word wellness because we already have a wellness program that's pretty well established, and so it seemed like a value that was consistent in differentiating the wellness versus safety, but also in a way that we can point to progress being made on that. In the reliable one, we also highlighted the fact that we have an ongoing continuous on-demand delivery requirement, and what's really we tried to capture there was we can't just worry about reliability today. We have to make investments that continue that reliability over the long term. Because we're so asset based, people will look at something, why are you spending money on that when it doesn't seem like it's immediate. It's because our 24/7, 365 continuous service doesn't end in 2025 or 2028 or 2030. We wanted to make sure we captured the fact that we're dealing with some long-term as well as near-term reliability requirements. And then we expanded the community value significantly to try to capture what we think are some of our cultural, in some ways our cultural uniqueness, but also reflect some of the things that we're starting to see emerge from a cultural perspective. One of the interesting things, so we added, we value a culture of intentional actions and outcomes. And what's kind of, I think, unique about EWEB, and I do some comparison and contrast, we like to do things. We don't, we plan, we understand long-term, but we actually like to do things. And so intentional actions and outcomes seems to reflect kind of who we are as an organization. Continuous improvement, the same way, diverse perspectives. We want to be trustworthy, respectful, equitable, and inclusive to employees and community members. Again, this is an expansion of what we had before, which really talked about our governance and being transparent. And then we also wanted to recognize that we are dedicated to our public service, to our professions. There are so many different professions that are where the expertise within EWEB, whether that be financial or analysis or working in various construction fields or electric fields, water fields, that those professions we feel like are part of what we're dedicated to. We're dedicated to our local governance, which is in this room, and our commitment to serve our communities honestly and with integrity. And so we really, there may be a little bit of wordsmithing to that as well to recognize some of the uniqueness of the workforce or other things. But our intent would be to check in. I think unless there's feedback directly at this point, President Brown, I can also check in with individual commissioners. But our goal, based on your feedback in May, and then any other feedback, we try to bring this back in October for your approval. So that's the one I wanted to touch on specifically. And if there's any other comments on the other correspondence, we can either do it tonight or through our individual follow-ups. Thank you, President Brown.
Comments from anybody? If not, then we good for agendas?
I think the agendas are in pretty good shape. There's going to be some shift because of the change in the headquarters approach, so that will provide some degree of of relief with some of the meeting agenda time. We did not specifically remove that from this agenda until the board took action today. And then the last part of this year, we've got a lot of work to do around Leberg and around finances, budgets, goal setting for next year as well, and then just making sure that all the 9 goals come together. And if there's any gaps, we'll try to fill those in to make sure we're getting our annual organizational goals done. So that's it.
Okay, it looks like we're getting ready for the beginning of the end, the board wrap up. Maybe,
Nothing from me.
you want me?
No, chance, there may be a chance I won't be at the November 1st one. I will be out of the country, but if my wife lets me dial in, I might, but I don't know about that.
Sonia?
Just one word. We talked a fair amount about Leberg tonight, and I know we're going to talk about it more. And I just want to commend the staff team that's working on that crazy thorny issue, and especially the work they're doing to expand the amount of outreach and to launch the information for us as a decision-making body. It's and also the PR, you know, the videos that have been made, things I've heard from a number of people that really helps them understand the situation in a way they couldn't otherwise. So just want to acknowledge all the effort that goes into helping us all and as a community work through that decision. Thanks.
I've got one last thing. This evening, I apologize for the texting, but I've been getting text messages from people up the river because we got potentially red flag warnings coming this weekend, high winds, 100-degree weather, and they're worried about our protocols. And so I told them I would ask. I'm in a meeting, and I said, well, I'll just bring it up about what our protocols are to shut the power off.
I've been having, I'm also texting too, so.
Yeah.
We're talking about the options.
And so we know that that's coming, and it's not going to be a fun weekend. It's not, you know, the protocols would be we would shut it down. Does it take a red flag warning, or does it just take an abundance of caution, or what does it take to shut things down?
So to actually shut things down, we don't have a protocol for it. It would be a decision that we'd have to make. So one of the things we're looking at is the weather patterns, and they're not quite sure. I'd say up north, they're probably going to be in shutdowns, probably down here, maybe not. So anyway, I've been going through a bunch of options with people.
And it's the same thing with the South Hills, and I mean, all our areas that are at risk.
It's similar, yeah. So
I'm going to the higher protocols where the trip has to be inspected, right?
We're already in that protocol right now. So the question, the next step would be actually shutting somebody off
For people who are listening to your response, can you explain what that is, that higher protocol and the sensitivity and the shutoffs?
Right, so right now our protective schemes are in a much faster tripping mode. So there's less energy that if something does happen, there's less energy that goes into the ignition arc. And then normally we have a reclose set so that automatically recloses, so those are cut out as well. And these are for the high risk circuits that are identified on our website, but it's mostly upriver and a few circuits in town here. And then there's a lot more stricter patrols. So if you have a trip out, you have a patrol before you re-energize to make sure there's not a dry material or something sitting on the or whatever problem there is.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And I will relay that information to the people that have texted me. So anything else? You can go to the order, Frank.
Ron, are we potentially going to work with, I was just going to maybe suggest we work on a response for that topic in general, because I have a feeling if one commissioner is going to get that, multiple might, and then just work with the communications team to provide a response.
I'll do that.
Thanks. I just had one thing, President Brown, and that's something I'm kind of excited about. Working with Kelly Hale, who you all know, on putting together an EWEB climate guidebook, which is something that I've been kind of excited about. I know she's excited about it. It'll address our SD15, and I know that some commissioners more than others like to see specific goals along the way. It'll start to identify goals. It'll have, it'll be our point of record where we report our operational footprint, carbon footprint, which we do on an annual basis. It'll also provide some technical references for things like on an annual basis, we will calculate our carbon intensity and methodology for both what we're supplying and what consumers can assume is the electricity they're consuming. And those are probably different numbers, but we'll establish the methodology. It'll be a clearinghouse of information that hopefully people can use as a reference book for things related to questions that come up about electricity and carbon and the climate impact and where we are with SD15 and where CAP 2.0 is and all this stuff. So it's pretty exciting. We'll have sort of a first edition around the end of the year, and then we'll try to iterate from there. But working on the sort of the outline and certain content right now, but looks excited about that. So it's just something to look forward to. Thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order? If not, we're adjourned.